This took place in 2012. I was 19 and had lived in my own apartment for a few months. I was lonely and decided to join a dating site for people to get to know one another. For context, my name is Alex. I'm a 31-year-old gay male and I live in Canada. One night, I had sat down at my kitchen table, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face in the dimly lit kitchen. It had been a rough few months since my last relationship ended. I finally decided it was time to put myself out there again. After some contemplation and a bit of encouragement from friends, I joined a popular dating site. The profile creation process was actually surprisingly straightforward. A few photos, a brief bio, and a list of interests. I leaned back, satisfied with my profile, and then I clicked submit. Within days, surprisingly, my inbox filled with messages. Of course, some were mundane, others intriguing, but one caught my eye, a message from a guy named James. James was handsome with sharp features, warm eyes, and a smile that radiated kindness. His message was thoughtful and engaging, showing genuine interest in my love for photography and hiking. James and I quickly hit it off, I will say. We spent hours chatting online, sharing stories about our lives, our dreams, our fears. James was charming, attentive, and he seemed to understand me in ways others hadn't. Our virtual connection soon led to phone calls, which only deepened our bond. After a few weeks, we decided it was time to meet in person. We chose a cozy cafe in the city, a neutral and public place to ease our first date jitters. When I arrived, I spotted James immediately, standing by the entrance with a bouquet of flowers. The gesture was sweet. My heart fluttered. Our first date was perfect. We laughed, talked, and felt a magnetic pull towards each other. I couldn't believe my luck. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly happy. As weeks turned into months, James and I grew closer. However, strange things started to happen. About 6 months into our relationship, we noticed someone following us occasionally, but we brushed it off as paranoia. Sometimes James would receive anonymous texts and calls that made his skin crawl. One evening, my best friend Mark approached me with a concerned look. "Alex, we need to talk," Mark said. His voice was serious. "I've been doing some digging. Something about James doesn't sit right with me." Mark revealed that he had found disturbing information about James online. Apparently, James had a past, one that involved multiple arrests for assault and stalking. My blood ran cold as Mark showed me this evidence, which was mugshots, police reports, news articles detailing James's violent history. My world shattered. Here I was, planning on moving in with him, and then my world is rocked by this information. How could I have been so blind? I decided I needed to confront James and end things immediately. We met at the park, a place that had become our sanctuary over the past few months. "James, we need to talk," I began, almost on the verge of tears, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found out about your past, the assaults, the stalking. Why didn't you tell me?" James' expression darkened. For a moment, the charming man I used to know vanished, replaced by someone unrecognizable. "I didn't think it mattered," James replied, his tone cold. "That's all behind me now." I had to take a step back, and then I responded to him with my heart pounding. "It does matter, James. I can't be with someone who has lied to me, who has hurt others." James's face twisted with anger. "You don't understand, Alex. I love you. I did all of this for you." What the hell does that mean? I wondered, but didn't ask. I felt a surge of fear, and anger. I turned and ran, my mind racing. I needed to get away from James to find safety. As I sprinted through the park, I could hear James calling after me, his voice growing more desperate and unhinged. Thankfully, I'd planned for this. I had told Mark about the confrontation and arranged for him to be nearby, just in case. Mark, along with two other friends, were waiting in a car that was parked at the entrance. When they saw me running, they jumped out and intercepted James, holding him back long enough for me to escape. In the following days, I filed a restraining order against James and changed my phone number. The police were involved, and James was arrested once again for violating his parole and restraining order. Yeah, also, he was on parole. That's something else I didn't know about. Also, the people following us were detectives who eventually came and talked to me about him. I struggled for a while to move on, haunted by the memories of what had transpired. I sought therapy and leaned on friends for support, but it was a hard one to get over. The experience left deep scars, but it also taught me a valuable lesson about trust and self-protection. Months later, I found myself at the kitchen table, my laptop once again open. I hesitated before logging back into the dating site. I know it's stupid to get back on it again. My heart was heavy with trepidation, but I knew I couldn't let fear control my life. With a deep breath, I updated my profile, ready to give love another chance, this time with eyes wide open. A year later, I met a guy I'm still with and happy as ever. But the scars still remain, and I have never forgotten about James, even years later. This happened when I was 16 years old. For context, I'm now 32 years old, and my name is Maya. To the story. I had been looking forward to this night all week. My parents had finally decided to take a well-deserved night out, and I was relishing in the idea of having the entire house to myself. At 16, I valued my alone time immensely, cherishing the peace and quiet that came with it. I had the evening all planned out. A long, luxurious bath with my favorite lavender bath salts, followed by a binge watch of my favorite show, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I had just got the complete series set on DVD, and maybe even some late night baking. My parents had planned on being gone until the next evening. By the time my parents left, the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over our cozy suburban home. I waved them off with a smile, closing the door and immediately feeling a thrill of freedom. I lit some scented candles in the bathroom, filled the tub with hot water, and sunk into the bath, letting the warmth and aroma envelop me. The tensions of the week melted away as if it was ice cream on a hot summer day. I closed my eyes and drifted into a state of blissful relaxation. An hour passed by in a blur of serenity. I was deep into a peaceful solitude when I was jolted by a sudden, insistent knock on the front door. My eyes snapped open and I frowned, annoyed at the interruption. I glanced at the clock in the bathroom and it said it was 9 o'clock. Odd, I thought. We never had visitors this late. Reluctantly, I wrapped myself in a plush towel and I walked to the door, my irritation growing with each step. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man I didn't recognize standing on the porch. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a worn jacket and a cap pulled over his eyes. "Yes?" I called out through the door, my voice carrying a hint of annoyance. Hi there, miss," the man said, flashing an unconvincing smile. "I'm a repairman. Your parents called me to fix your radiator." My instincts screamed at me that this was a lie. My parents were meticulous planners and would never, I mean never, arrange for a repairman to come over while I was home alone, especially not at this hour. No, they didn't," I replied firmly. You'll have to come back tomorrow." The man's smile faded, and he leaned closer to the door, his expression darkening. "Look, I drove all the way out here. Just let me in for a few minutes to check on things." My heart began to race, but I kept my voice steady. "No, please leave now, or I'm going to call the police," I screamed. There was a tense silence, then a muttered curse. The man turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I watched through the peephole until I was sure he was gone, then quickly locked and bolted the door. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart, the uneasy feeling lingering, but I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I had handled it, and the man was gone. I returned to my bath, hoping to reclaim some of the tranquility I had lost, but as I settled back into the warm water, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist in the flickering candlelight, and the once soothing silence now felt oppressive. Me being a true crime buff, I was shook. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. I tried to dismiss the paranoia, but the feeling only gnawed at me, refusing to be ignored. I finished my bath quickly, dried off, and dressed in my comfiest pajamas. I made my way to the living room, intending to distract myself with my favorite TV show. But the unsettling feeling persisted. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I tried to focus on TV, but my eyes kept darting to the windows and to the dark corners of the room. I felt exposed, vulnerable. Deciding that enough was enough, I picked up my phone and called my parents. I hated to interrupt their special night out, but I needed to hear their voices, to feel some semblance of safety. My mother answered on the third ring. "Hi, sweetie. Is everything okay?" "Mom, did you call a repairman to come over tonight?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, of course not. Why? Did someone come to the house?" my mother replied, concern evident in her voice. I explained what had happened, and my mother assured me that they would be home soon. They urged me to call the police if anything else suspicious happened and to stay on the phone with them until they got back. Feeling slightly more at ease, I locked all the windows and double-checked the doors. I sat on the couch with the phone pressed to my ear, my parents' voice a comforting lifeline, as I waited for them to return. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one stretching into an eternity. Finally, the sound of my parents' car pulled into the driveway brought a rush of relief. I ran to the door and threw it open, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders as I saw their familiar faces. My father gave me a reassuring hug, whilst my mother looked around the house, making sure everything was in order. They didn't find anything amiss, but the incident left lingering senses of unease. That night, with my parents home, I finally felt safe enough to fall asleep. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to hold an undercurrent of tension. I knew that the man had been turned away, but the memory of his dark expression and the unnerving feeling of being watched stayed with me, a reminder of that evening. It was an ordinary Thursday evening when I made my weekly trip to Walmart. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as I pushed my cart through the aisles, filling it with groceries for my family. As I compared prices on cereal, I felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching me. I glanced around but saw only other shoppers busy with their own lives. Shaking off the feeling, I continued shopping. After a while, I noticed a man lingering nearby, seemingly focused on items wherever I went. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence, but his presence became increasingly unsettling. He was in his late 30s, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His eyes seemed to pierce through me, making my skin crawl. I quickly finished my shopping then and headed to the checkout. The man followed my movements with a keen interest, standing just a few lanes away. I paid for my groceries and hurried to my car, heart pounding. I loaded my bags as fast as I could, glancing nervously over my shoulder. The man stood at the entrance, staring directly at me. Once safely in my car, I drove home, trying to shake off the fear. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a creepy coincidence, but that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My husband, Mark, tried to reassure me, but I remained uneasy. The following week, I returned to Walmart. This time, I was more cautious, scanning the aisles for any signs of the man. To my relief, though, he was nowhere to be seen. I finished my shopping and headed home, feeling somewhat foolish for my previous paranoia. That night, the phone rang. Mark answered it, expecting a telemarketer or a wrong number. Instead, a raspy voice said, "I know where you live." Mark's face turned pale as he hung up. He immediately called the police, but they could do little with so little information. The calls continued over the next few days. Sometimes the caller would say nothing, just breathing heavily. Other times, he would taunt us with details about our lives, like, "Nice car, Angela. How's the Honda running?" Or, "Mark, how's work at the hospital?" Mark and I were living in constant fear. We installed security cameras and changed our phone numbers, but the calls didn't stop. The stalker seemed to know everything about us, even our new numbers. I started seeing the man everywhere, in my rearview mirror, across the street from our house, even at the grocery store. One evening, I was leaving for work. I'd found a note on my windshield. It read, "I'm always watching." Panic gripped me. I drove home, hands shaking, and showed the note to Mark. I called the police, but without more evidence, there was nothing they could do. One night, the phone rang again. This time, the caller said, "I'm closer than you think." Mark and I felt a cold chill run down our spines. We decided to stay with Mark's parents for a while after that, hoping to escape the terror. The next day, as we were packing our bags, I noticed a car parked across the street. It was the man. I could see him clearly, watching our every movement. We called the police, but by the time officers arrived, the man was gone. Desperate for help, Mark and I hired a private investigator named John. John was a former detective with a reputation for solving difficult cases. He immediately began investigating the stalker, gathering any information he could. John discovered that the stalker, whose name was Derek, had a history of obsessive behavior. He had been arrested in the past for stalking and harassment, but had always managed to evade serious punishment. John also learned that Derek had been fired from his job a few months ago and had blamed Mark. That's right, Derek worked for Mark. Technically. See, Mark and his family own several restaurants, and Mark works at corporate, so the person that fired Derek works for Mark. John set a trap for Derek. He had me and Mark go about our lives as usual while he kept a close watch. One evening, as I was leaving work, Derek appeared, following me closely. John followed us, staying out of sight. When Derek approached my car, John sprang into action. He confronted Derek, who tried to flee. A brief struggle ensued, but John managed to subdue Derek and hold him until the police arrived. Derek was arrested and charged with stalking, harassment, and several other offenses. With the evidence John had gathered, the case against Derek was strong. He was convicted, and sentenced to several years in prison because, come to find out, he was on probation also. The ordeal left me and Mark shattered, but we slowly began to rebuild our lives. The fear that had once gripped our home started to fade, replaced by a sense of relief and gratitude and safety. We thanked John for his help, and try to move forward, knowing that Derek was no longer a threat. I couldn't thank John enough for his help. Who knows how long this would have went on had it not been for him. Though the memory of those terrifying months lingered, Mark and I grew stronger, and it made us even closer. We definitely found comfort in each other and our family. We had faced a nightmare and emerged on the other side, forever changed, but no longer afraid.